Session of the Senate in the second regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri will lead the chamber in prayer.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, this month of the Holy Rosary, we pray that our Blessed Mother keep us in her grace and ever under her protection. As we continue to face the hardships brought on by this pandemic, we trust in our Blessed Mother and in you, our Lord Jesus, to help us rebuild and recover from this crisis. We know that with your love and power, we can triumph over this virus, over these storms, over the ills and disasters that plague the world. I'd like to continue with the Prayer of Memorare. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy clemency hear and answer me. And to end my prayer, I like to read the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen. Let us remain standing for the singing of the Philippine national anthem.
Bayang mag-ibig, dala sa silanganan, habang napusin, sa kanyang mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tulad ka ng mag-ibig, sa manlulubi, di ka masisigil, sa lahat ng mundo, di mo'y nagsagamit kung buta, may nilagang tula, ang tanong na mahal. Ang pagkawatawan mo'y tagumpay na nagtitigil. Ang bituin ng araw niyang kailan ang may nagtitigil. Lumanang araw na naman, pagsinta, tuloy natin sa ating mo. Ang nidala natin, may nangapin, ang mamatay na dahil sa'yo.
The secretary will please call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara,
Present.
Binay,
Present.
Cayetano, De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon,
Present.
Gatchalian, Go, Gordon,
Presente.
Ontiveros,
Present.
Lacson, Lapid, Marcos,
Present.
Pacquiao,
Present.
Pangilinan,
Present.
Pimentel III, Poe,
Present.
Recto, Revilla,
Present.
Tolentino,
Present.
Nueva,
Present.
Villar,
Present.
Zubiri.
Present.
The Senate President Vicente Soto III is present.
With 7 senators physically present and 15 senators virtually present for a total of 22, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we dispense with the reading of the journals of the 19th session, October 5, and the 20th session, October 6, 2020, and the 21st session of October 7, 2020, and consider them as approved, Mr. President.
Any objection? Chair hears none. The journals are approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the short reference of business, Mr. President.
Secretary will proceed with the reference of business.
Reference of business, message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 5 October 2020, it passed House Number 7679 entitled An Act Promoting the Rights of Deserted or Abandoned Children with Unknown Parents, Protecting Their Status as Natural-Born Citizens of the Philippines, and Providing Penalties Against Acts Inimical to their welfare, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
Referred to the Committees on Women and Social Justice.
Bills on first reading, Senate Number 1873, an act establishing satellite specialty hospitals to facilitate access to specialized medical care in identified regions of the Philippines and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Angara.
To the Committees on Health and Ways and Means and Finance.
Senate Number 1874, an act upgrading the Lanao del Norte Provincial Hospital located in the municipality of Baroy, Lanao del Norte, into a regional medical center to be known as the Lanao del Norte Regional Medical Center and appropriating funds therefore, introduced by Senator Angara.
Referred to the Committees on Health and Finance.
Senate Number 1875, an act amending Section 18 of Republic Act Number 11223, otherwise known as the Universal Healthcare Act, introduced by Senator Angara.
To the Committee on Health.
Resolution, PS Resolution Number 537, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the reported series of killings and proliferation of illegal gambling operations and drug trade in the province of Negros Oriental, with the end in view of recommending measures that will protect public welfare and maintain peace and order in the country, introduced by Senator De La Rosa.
To the Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs.
Communications, letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act Number 7653, the New Central Bank Act. Memorandum numbers M2020 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, and 75 dated 18, 22, 21, 24, 25, 28, and 27 September 2020. Circular numbers 1097 and 1098 dated 21 and 24 September 2020, and circular letter number CL 2020-44 dated 16 September 2020.
To the Committee on Banks.
Committee report number 131, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Health and Demography and Finance on Senate number 1876 with Senators Revilla Jr., Angara, Ontiveros, and Go as authors thereof, entitled An Act Authorizing the Department of Health, DOH, to set and approve the bed capacity and service capability of all DOH hospitals, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate number 665, 698, 863, and 1226, taking into consideration House number 5673, sponsor Senator Go.
To the calendar for ordinary business.
Mr. President.
Senator Ontiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I deliver just a very brief manifestation po?
Joe, the leader.
Yes, Mr. President, she may proceed, Mr. President. You
Right,
recognize.
Senator Ontiveros may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I didn't want to add to the agenda anymore by delivering a privileged speech, but I just like to make it of record that yesterday was International Day of the Girl. In other jurisdictions, young girls take the seat of the highest offices of the land for a day as a symbolic reminder that their voices must be reflected in policy and legislation. Amidst our political tempests and the cynical politics of the day, I hope we take a moment to realize why we legislate, for the least and for the last, for the forgotten and the invisible, for the generation whose future is still in our hands. I'm so grateful to Senator Gordon, the chair of the Committee on Justice, for hearing in committee the bill raising the age of statutory consent. I hope to be able to answer any interpellation questions on my bill prohibiting child, early, and forced marriage today. Marami pong salamat, Mr. President. Mabuhay po ang batang babae. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, madam. Mr. President,
Yes.
I move that we vote on third reading on House Bill number 7507. Mr. President, this bill was distributed to the members last week, complying with the 3-day rule of the Constitution.
All right. Hearing no objection, the Secretary will read the title of the measure and conduct a roll call vote.
House Bill number 7507, an act granting the San Miguel Aero City Incorporated a franchise to construct, develop, establish, operate, and maintain a domestic and international airport in the municipality of Bulacan, province of Bulacan, and to construct, develop, establish, operate, and maintain an adjacent airport city. Roll call vote. The Honorable Senators Angara, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, De La Rosa, Trilon,
Yes.
Gatchalian, Go, Gordon, Ontiveros, Lacson, Lapid, Marcos,
Yes.
Pacquiao,
Yes.
Pangilinan, Pimentel III, Poe,
Yes.
Recto, Revilla,
Yes.
Tolentino,
Yes.
Villanueva,
Resounding yes.
Villar, Zubiri,
Yes.
Senate President Soto III.
Yes. With 21 affirmative votes, no negative votes, no abstention, House Bill 7507 is approved on third reading. Before we continue, Majority Leader, I'd like to make a manifestation. With the
Yes, please,
permission
Mr.
of the
President.
body, we would like to thank the House of Representatives for the passage of this measure and wholeheartedly my gratitude on behalf of some people, some important friends, all the 23 senators for the passage of this measure. This was an idea that was born 17 years ago, November of 2003, when Ambassador Dading Coangco, Ramon Ang, Fernando Po Jr., Ed Angara, Tessie Aquino Oreta, Greg Honasan, and yours truly met thinking that the next president then was going to be Fernando Po Jr. We had the idea of building a new airport city and an airport. We did not know the location yet, but that was the idea of the group. And it was spearheaded by Danding and Ramon and Fernando Po Jr. So it is with great pleasure that we thank our colleagues for the passage of a measure that was born 17 years ago. Thank you. Majority Leader?
Congratulations, Mr. President. Congratulations.
Majority Leader.
Yes,
If I may.
we'd like to also recognize, I believe Senator Bato also listed to make a manifestation, but let's, if Senator Bato will allow, let's give also priority to the host of the airport, no other than our Senator from Bulacan, Senator Joel Villanueva, Mr. President. After which,
Senator Joel
Senator Bato.
Villanueva. Senator Villanueva is recognized.
Thank you very much, Majority Floor Leader. Thank you very much, Mr. President. It's such a great honor and privilege to host this airport city in our beloved province on behalf of the people of Bulacan, and I'm sure the people of everyone from Central Luzon, together with Senator Angara, Senator Gordon, Senator Gatchalian. We are also very thankful to our dear colleagues headed by our Senate President, of course, Senator Grace Po, our chairperson. Again, this is a dream come true, and we just want to put on record that we are so grateful because not only it will produce 1 million jobs without expense, without the government spending a single cent, without any government guarantees. We are so thankful because we know that this is a dream come true for all of us. And mabuhay ang Senado, mabuhay ang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po. God bless us all.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe Senator Bato also wishes to manifest, Mr. President.
Senator Ronald De La Rosa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Majority Leader. Mr. President, I would like to explain my affirmative vote on House Bill number 7507 for the San Miguel Aero City Incorporated franchise. Today's approval of House Bill number 7507 will not only benefit the people of Bulacan and its nearby provinces, but our entire country. As we all know, the role of the private sector in nation building is indispensable. The government alone cannot provide all the essential social services to uplift the lives of our people without the support and vital participation of the private sector. I hope that our prompt but rigorous deliberation and passage of this bill will inspire our partners in the private sector to further help the government in improving its needed infrastructure to achieve sustainable and inclusive economic growth. We hope that many private investors and businesses will follow the footsteps of San Miguel Aero City Incorporated in providing infrastructure, creating thousands of jobs, and contributing revenues for the operation of the government. US President John F. Kennedy once said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." To the San Miguel Corporation, thank you for doing this for our country and our people. Let this airport be the runway where our people's dreams and aspirations shall take flight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, Senator Grace Poe would like to also manifest,
Senator Grace Poe is recognized.
after which Senator Gordon, after which.
Good afternoon, and I would like to thank my dear colleagues for your support for our franchise bills, not only for the San Miguel Airport, but for the other franchise bills that we passed earlier, both broadcast and telco. In the past, maybe we weren't really paying attention to the importance of a franchise agreement, but this time, especially with a lot of our countrymen in need of more jobs, I am glad that this body has recognized that we really needed to fast track these franchises more than anything to provide employment. As I mentioned in our deliberations, the San Miguel Airport alone will provide 450,000 jobs during the construction phase alone. And then after that, upwards of 1 million people will be able to benefit from this undertaking, not to mention the thousands or hundreds of thousands of passengers that will fly in and out of the country every day. But not only that, we also had Aboitiz Power, Davao Light, that actually has shown exemplary service in the Davao area. And now even our majority leader would want them to move on to provide service for Bukidnon. And we also had other radio stations that like 94.7, etc., that we actually grew up listening to. So these are franchises that have actually proven themselves or have been run by companies that have proven consistency in delivering the service. I would like to thank also the Senate President for mentioning that this airport was a dream 17 or how many years ago. That is true. That was really the priority when FPJ ran, was to provide livelihood and especially support for the poorest of the poor of our countrymen. So again, thank you for keeping his memory alive and his legacy. So with that, again, my appreciation to our colleagues. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Senator Richard Gordon would like to also be recognized, Mr. President.
Senator Richard Gordon, gentleman from Zambales, is recognized.
Mr. President, I was happy to co-sponsor this bill, principally because it is a no-brainer in terms of development. It's something that we really need. If for the first time we're building a new airport, doesn't matter whether it's in Central Luzon. The point is we're building a new airport that will enhance the other airports in the area like Clark, like Subic, and like the Manila International Airport. Certainly, with the proposed infrastructure plan of the area where you don't have to pass through Manila from that airport, you can go direct to sa Batangas. I think this is also another avenue upon which the business of business, which requires speed, will be enhanced. Now, Mr. President, this is an example of domestic corporations being given an incentive of the corporate income tax. When we pass the corporate income tax, they will not be subject to the old taxes. They'll be subjected to lower taxes. In fact, they will not even be subject to income taxes. It's only when they're already fully developed when they'll be subjected to income taxes. And even if they're developed after 10 years, that's the only time that tax adjustments will have to be made. And yet, here is a case where the foregone foregone taxes that have been calculated is about 38 billion from the period of construction and 1 billion to 2 billion per year upon the start of operations. Now, Mr. President, I spoke with Ramon Ang and he said the Bulacan Airport will attract a lot of foreign investments in Central Luzon. And that is why I think we support this because within the realm of COVID's problems, this will be another solution upon which we can rely on making sure that we can get investments. Ramon Ang intends to attract Foxconn, assemblers of Apple products, which means that a lot of jobs, not only during the construction phase, but also other jobs in logistics operations and manufacturing, just like Vietnam attracted Samsung. If we can attract Foxconn here, it will be definitely a big boost. A big boost to our country. Now, Mr. President, also the nice part about this is that Mr. Ang says that there will be no gambling activity allowed within the area. That's a big plus, Mr. President, and I think that it can show that we don't have to rely on gambling to get new investments. We can rely on our genius as a country, our talents as a country, and certainly the ecozone here will be 100% for export. So he gets the best of both worlds as a corporation later on, where he gets domestic incentives, but all his products will all be exported, and that will be part of the incentives that will be given. Incentives are not bad, Mr. President, especially if we're going to see such a huge investment that the local, the Filipino, is going to come in. And they come from a great company called San Miguel that was here from the beginning during the Spanish period and was continued by the Sorianos and later on by Danding Coangco and now by Ramon Ang. And it has branched into other things, to infrastructure, not just beverage or brewery or food. It has branched into so many other things. And this latest one is the airport, Mr. President. Having said that, Mr. President, this allows us some competitive capability because cargo loading will be also enhanced. Right now, it takes an awful lot of money to bring in cargo. Just-in-time arrival will be at $1 per kilo for the cargo that is going to come into Bulacan. And the nice part about it is that the businessmen and the people have choice. Choice where they want to work, choice where the businessman wants to invest, choice where to land the airplane, and choices insofar as the incentives within the area so that this will be a real boost to what my good friend Mick Subiri always enviably always says, the rich bill, because that's the objective of our country. We want to enrich everybody, including Frank Drilon Iloilo, the Ilonggos. They're already rich. We want to enrich them some more. There's nothing wrong with being rich in the country so long as you make your money in an honest, creative way, Mr. President. And this is what this is all about. And so, Mr. President, it's great pride and honor that we are able to make our vote here formally and say a big yes, just like America's Got Talent. It will show now that Filipinos got talent, not just the British or the Americans, but Filipinos got talent to make sure that we can really compete in the future with the rest of the best of the world. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we recognize Senator Bong Revilla, Mr. President, Ramon Bong Revilla.
Senator Bong Revilla is recognized.
Mr. President, I would just like to spread into the record my congratulations to you for steering into realization the plans and dreams that you have a few years back. We are with you and you have our full support. We cannot overemphasize this measure. Indeed, will bring development not only in the province of Bulacan, but to our country as a whole. May this measure inspire our other projects of similar nature. Pag nagkakaisa po talaga ang public and private sectors, tiyak na makikinabang ay ang ating mga kababayan. So that's all, Mr. President, and congratulations to our other colleagues and to our chairman.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you,
May we also
Senator
recognize
Bong Revilla.
Our Senate Minority Floor Leader.
Yes, the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader. I just want to spread into the record a question. The Senate unanimously approved this measure, and we assume that it will be approved and becomes law. The question that comes to mind is: can the next, after the private sector, the grantee has invested sizable sums of money of private funds in pursuit of this project, can the next Congress rescind and remove all these incentives? That is a question that we have to ask, because here the private sector, pursuant to this grant of incentives, is investing in order to carry out the objectives of the franchise of the franchise granted. It is my submission that this becomes a contract between the investor and the state, because principles of equity will not permit that after the state has granted its incentives and you have encouraged the private sector on this basis to invest, suddenly you withdraw the incentives. That is the same principle why I have basic problems about the rationalization of fiscal incentives insofar as the present investors are concerned. They came into the country on the premise that these are the incentives. Suddenly we say no more. That is why my submission is that we should make the rationalization effective on the new entrants, not on those who are already here, because that is changing the terms of the contract between the state and the grantee. And I transpose that to where we are today in the San Miguel City franchise. My submission is that the state and Congress, even in exercise of its plenary powers, cannot revoke this franchise granted, because this is the consideration upon which San Miguel will make the investment. In a similar vein, when the investors made investments under the Omnibus Investments Act, if they are granted the incentives, that is the contract between the investor and the state. For us to suddenly say, no, we will rationalize, you can no longer enjoy these incentives, to me is questionable. And that is why my position is the incentives granted in the rationalization of fiscal incentives should be prospective in nature. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
We recall something like that, hearing that from the President Pro Tem. Senator Ping Lacson is recognized.
Yes, Mr. President, that was exactly the point that I raised, the issue that I raised when I interpolated or interjected when we were discussing the AeroCity bill, that it will run in conflict with the create measure if this is passed ahead of the create measure. And so we should be very clear on this issue, Mr. President, because there's a catch-all phrase. Actually, there are two catch-all phrases, no? In the create bill. One is repealing, and the other one is amendatory. So we should really synchronize or reconcile those two provisions under the create bill and the AeroCity bill. That's all, Mr. President.
The President Pro Tem is recognized, Senator Ralph Recto.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to find out from the Secretariat how my vote was recorded.
The Secretariat said they did not see you in the hall when the third reading was being called.
Mr. President, I was in my room, but the internet connection was bad.
All right. That
So my
means
vote should be recorded as affirmative, Mr. President.
So, all right. There are 22 affirmative votes
Thank you, Mr. President.
as recorded. Thank you, Senator Recto.
Mr. President,
Senator Gordon is recognized.
I just would like to manifest the same thing because I was having my lunch in the other room in my house when the vote was. How was my vote?
You were counted because your internet connection was on.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, you were counted.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator Tolentino,
Senator
Mr. President, would like to speak.
Senator Tolentino is recognized. Gentleman from Cavite.
Mr. President, I joined the manifestations of our colleagues from Iloilo and Cavite, Senators Drilon and Lacson, that we might encounter a problem here, a controversy, if the recently passed AeroCity franchise will be circumvented by a general law. But my manifestation now would include perhaps the invocation of a property right. In our Constitution, it is stated that no one should be deprived of his property without due process of law. It now becomes a property right of the proponent here because investments will have to be made, linkages with other investors will have to be made. Thereafter, if it is a property right, just compensation would have to be made if it will be thwarted by a general law. So to add to the statements of the two distinguished gentlemen, I invoke perhaps the property right of the proponent here would be in play. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Of the proponent here would
Thank
be
you, Mr.
in
President.
play. Thank
Mr.
you,
President, and if I may be allowed also to just give a short manifestation. As I said during the committee hearing, Mr. President, this airport is a no-brainer. No-brainer for our people, no-brainer for our country. We really need this, not just today, we needed this yesterday, Mr. President. Our neighbors in the ASEAN have been investing billions of dollars in their airports. Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and even Singapore just invested 1.3 billion for their Changi Airport to create the Jewel, which is now a tourist attraction all over the world. And I've seen it myself, Mr. President. It is a sight to behold. And so whenever you enter an airport, that is the first thing that you see on how the country's development is growing. And so this is a welcome development for our country, Mr. President. And I'm proud to be part of this 18th Congress, which you lead, Mr. President. You are the Senate President, and I'm so proud of our colleagues, the ladies and gentlemen here who voted in favor of this, because 10 years from now, when we land in that airport, when we take off from that beautiful airport and we look around the beautiful infrastructure there, let it be known and remembered that we were part of history in being able to craft legislation to allow them to build this airport, Mr. President. I am proud of this 18th Congress. I am proud of my colleagues. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Majority Leader.
Mr. President,
Senator Grace Poe.
yes, one last. I would like to also support the pronouncement of Senator Drilon and also Senator Gordon and also the clarification, of course, of Senator Lacson. It's really detrimental if we move the goalposts in the middle of the game. And I think that we already committed to this, and maybe that could also spill over to create that the contracts that we already made in the past, we should really be able to honor them. So the goal is for our commitment here for this franchise, not the terms not be repealed by a general law or anything after that, because the government really needs to honor its contract. That's all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that,
Senator Gordon.
Senator
again,
Gordon, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I just wanted to add when the Majority Floor Leader, under the guidance of the Minority Floor Leader, started perorating on the the airports, the importance of an airport. He forgot to mention the Bukidnon Airport, Mr. President, and I'm very happy for him too. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you po, Mr. President. Yun yung Bukidnon Airport na may pera na nawala pa. Hopefully with the help of Senator Sani Angara, maibalik po yung pera. Nakuha nila sa COVID yung buong amount. So, how I wish San Miguel will build in Bukidnon. We will welcome them also with open arms if we can do that. But fortunately, there's an ongoing program. We just need funding from our Committee on Finance, Mr. President. So, moving on, Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1357 under Committee Report number 50. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order.
We are in the period of amendments, and it's a continuing interpellation of our dear minority floor leader. I'm sorry, period of interpellation rather.
No.
It's continuing interpellation of our minority floor leader. May we recognize the chairperson of the committee, our distinguished lady senator from Taguig, Senator Pia Cayetano, and to interpellate our dear minority floor leader.
The sponsor of the measure, Chair of the Ways and Means, Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized, and the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Will the gentle lady sponsor yield the floor, continually lead the floor for interpretation?
Yes, of course, Mr. President. I'm just setting up, but His Honor may go ahead and proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. President, on section 291 of the proposed measure, it says this title shall cover all existing investment promotion agencies as defined in this code or related laws and all other investment promotion agencies and similar authorities that may be created by law in the future. Now, the question that I have to raise is, we assume, I do not know the timing, but we assume that the franchise of that we just approved for the creation of for the construction of the airport will have incentives, has incentives in fact under the measure that we passed. What is now the effect of this create on that existence and grant of that incentive under the law that we just approved on third reading? The reason I state that is under to continue under section 293F. It says the IPAs or investment promotion agencies, which are under the coverage of this act, shall refer to government agencies created by law, executive order, decree, or other instance in charge of promoting investments, etc., and covers all other similar existing authorities or that may be created by law in the future. So the first question, the question that I raise is, would this now have the effect of amending the existing grants of incentives to the agencies which came to our shores because of the incentives granted?
Sorry, the first question is agencies. What does His Honor mean by agencies? I'm not-
Okay, let me phrase the question. We just enacted or we passed the franchise for the Bulacan Airport. Question, there are incentives there contained in the law. Question, can this bill that we are discussing and the FIRB formed under that revise the incentives we have granted under this bill that we just voted on third reading?
Mr. President, that's also why I wanted to be given time during that bill to study and to discuss with our colleagues some concerns that we had. And I would like to repeat that at that time, all I was saying that allow me to do my job well and to post these questions also while it's still relevant so that we can ensure that we are crafting it correctly. Anyway, as it is, I conducted my interpellation with the limited time I had to study. And here we are today with this question that His Honor has at hand. I think, though, that I have a simple response to that because if you read section 291 of this bill, it refers to, it says that it will cover all existing investment promotion agencies as defined in the code and all other investment promotion agencies and similar authorities that may be created by law in the future. So my interpretation is that itong other similar authorities must be compared to an IPA. And that bill that we just passed, Mr. President, is not an IPA. It was not a creation of an IPA, and it is a franchise. So it would appear that it is not covered by CREATE, Mr. President. That is my interpretation.
All right. It's good to spread that into the record because there are other portions here of the bill which would also rationalize the grant of incentives to activities, not only to enterprises. So
And I agree with His Honor. That is also my objective when I was interpellating and as I receive interpellations today, that I really am just for clarity. So I am happy that His Honor is asking me this question so that we can spread into the record the interpretation that this representation has.
yeah. All right. Further, Mr. President, the bill will create or will cover incentives being enjoyed by the registered business enterprises that are registered with the IPAs. There are, however, other agencies that administer incentives, such as the Civil Service, the Civil Authority, Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, the Boy Scouts of the Philippines, the Cooperative Development Authority of the President of the Philippines. Specific question: are these agencies which grants also incentives under their charter covered by this bill?
Yes, Mr. President, I was just confirming. If you look at the section on the repealing clauses and amendatory clauses, we did not include the special laws here, Mr. President. As a bit of a background, there was an intention at some point, even before it was before that the bill was referred to the Senate committee, I think in the early days, to try to include it, but in the final draft, there is no referral to special laws, Mr. President.
With the permission,
Of course, the IPAs, no? Let me just clarify. The IPAs. So I'm making a distinction between special laws creating the IPAs, and then special laws that are specific to an industry or an activity. No, there is no reference to those activities and industries.
I yield to Senator Recto.
yes, with the permission of the minority leader and the sponsor of the measure. If I am not mistaken, in the House bill, it is included. In fact, the repealing clause in the House bill includes more than at least 70 laws, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, this was all done prior to the pandemic, no? And that's why I welcome the Senate committee report, because the sponsor of the measure is accurate in saying it is not included in this version. But in the House bill, most of these laws that Congress passed for incentives are all included, Mr. President. Just for the record, thank you very much.
Yes, we confirm
Yes,
that. We confirm that, Mr. President, and just for the record also, when we cleaned up the bill, the version that we came up with and filed is a version that did not include the special laws, Mr. President.
Yeah,
Special laws.
that is a very important distinction, Mr. President, in the light of what we just approved insofar as the airport in Bulacan is concerned. I must emphasize that the intention of this bill and the view of the sponsor, the intention is not to deprive the grantee in the San Miguel Airport the incentives, because the investment is based on the basis of the incentives granted. And I want to emphasize that. And therefore, the good sponsor is saying that incentives granted by the Civil Aviation Authority of the Philippines, the Boy Scouts of the Philippines, and the Cooperative Development of the Philippines can continue, and these agencies can continue to exercise its authority to grant incentives.
Yes, His Honor is correct for those agencies that His Honor mentioned.
Thank you. What about the laws which grants certain activities in certain laws which provide for mandatory inclusion of certain activities in the investment priorities plan? Let me cite a few examples. Under PD 705, incentives are granted to industrial tree plantation. Under Republic Act 7942, exploration, mining, quarrying, and processing of materials, there is an incentive granted for capital equipments. Insofar as books or printing of books and textbooks are concerned, certain incentives are granted under Republic Act 8047. Similarly, there are incentives granted for the refining, storage, marketing, and distribution of petroleum products. Also, the Renewable Energy Act and the Republic Act 9513 grants certain incentives. And finally, Republic Act 9593 or the Tourism Act of 2009 grants certain incentives. What will happen to this specific activity for which investment of incentives are granted?
Mr. President, mandatory laws are also not repealed. Mr. President, did His Honor hear my response? I've responded.
So these incentives will stay.
Yes, Mr. President.
So at the period of amendments, will the good sponsor agree to deletion of the repeal of certain provisions of the Tourism Act and the Republic Act 9593? There is a specific repeal.
Mr. President, TIESA is considered an IPA, Mr. President. So along with other IPAs, the objective is to cover them here in this bill, under in this CREATE bill, Mr. President.
So the TIESA is part of those in government enterprises that can be regulated by the FIRB insofar as the power to grant incentives are concerned.
Yes, Mr. President, that is the objective, yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, what about the incentives granted by the Bangsamoro Autonomous by the Bangsamoro Regional Bangsamoro Authority in Muslim Mindanao is concerned? Is that also under the authority of the FIRB?
Mr. President, just to go back to His Honor's last question, the bill very specifically mentions the IPAs, not just so His Honor knows, and the TIESA is specifically mentioned there. So it's not just an assumption, it's really mentioned, just to be clear about it, Mr. President.
So that is why I also clarified that the TIESA will now be under the supervision of the FIRB.
Yes, yes. And what I am clarifying is that it is specifically listed there among the other IPAs, just so His Honor knows.
Yes, but the others.
As to the last question,
the others which are activities like industrial tree plantation, etc., these are activities included in the investment priorities plan pursuant to enabling statutes. Are these also deemed amended by this bill?
I'm not sure what His Honor means. If it is in the IPP, then it would be amended by way of the new SIPP. There's no.
It's not only, it's included in the IPP because of the specific provision of the enabling law. What is the effect of this bill I will repeat. I will cite some of them.
So,
Incentives granted to industrial tree plantation.
yes,
That's
Mr.
specific.
President, we did not touch those. We are not repealing those enabling laws. I think that's covered by what I said earlier about the mandatory law. So those enabling laws that created those exceptions, we are not touching that. So it continues to be incentivized. It will continue to be incentivized under the SIPP and under the CREATE bill when it becomes a law.
So just to be clear, the inclusion of certain activities in the present IPP, which is pursuant to a provision of law, is not deemed amended if this bill that we are debating upon becomes law.
Yes, Mr. President. I've said that, and I confirm that these mandatory laws that I mentioned, that mandatory laws in general that grant incentives are not being repealed here, and they carry over, Mr. President, to the new SIPP,
Thank you.
future SIPP.
And they cannot be amended even if you review the SIPP every 3 years as proposed in the bill.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, all right. Now, Article 12, Section 8 of the Bangsamoro region in Muslim Mindanao, Bangsamoro Authority in the Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, grants the Parliament the authority to grant tax exemptions and incentives upon approval of the majority of its members. How will this power of the Bangsamoro Parliament be treated insofar as this bill that we are debating on is concerned? Will the incentives granted by the Bangsamoro Authority, also Parliament, be also subject to this law?
Mr. President, BARM is not included. What is included is the BOI arm.
Okay.
Because BOI arm is an IPA, Mr. President.
Right. Yes, that I see that is specifically included. May I know if this BOI arm is still existing? And in other words, is it absorbed by the new BA or BARM
Is that the word?
provisions?
It is existing, Mr. President. Continues to exist.
Okay. So, okay, just to go back, just for the record, the powers of the FIRB would not include the power of the Bangsamoro Parliament to grant tax exemptions and incentives under its organic law. Can we confirm that for the record, ma'am?
They can do what they want. Yeah, Mr. President, they can do what they want. We do not touch that, Mr. President, under CREATE.
Yes, including the creation of economic zones, industrial estates, and free ports under the BARM law.
As long as it's within BARM, Mr. President, it is not our intention to touch it.
Yeah, it's within the BARM. Obviously, the BARM Parliament and the BARM law would only cover the BARM territory. But that's what we are raising precisely. We're raising precisely if the relationship between CREATE and the BARM law, because BARM law has a specific provision on the creation of economic zones, industrial estates, and free ports, which provides that, quote, the Bangsamoro government may establish economic zones, industrial estates, and free ports in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, including the establishment of the Bangsamoro Economic Zone Authority, and provide fiscal incentives and other benefits to the investors therein. This is not affected by this CREATE bill.
Yes, Mr. President, it is not affected by this bill. They may continue to do the what His Honor read into the record, some of their powers. They can continue to exercise those powers.
That's all. Just for the record, that the BARM Parliament, the BARM government can continue to exercise its powers under the Organic Act. Thank you for that, Mr. President. Can I have 1 minute suspension to review my notes, Mr. President?
Of course.
Session suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Going now to the section 297, which refers to the expanded function of the FIRB. One of the provisions here under paragraph B is no, it is clear. I'm sorry. Yeah, it is clear under paragraph B that the present IPA's power is only recommendatory. The final authority is with the FIRB, so that the existing IPAs can only process applications, and the final approval will be lodged in the FIRB. Now, this power can also be delegated to the technical committee or to the IPA by the FIRB. So the powers granted to the FIRB are very specific and granted by Congress and delegated by Congress to FIRB. Now, FIRB is authorized to further delegate this. Under what situation can the FIRB delegate this to delegate this power to the IPAs? Or is it the contemplation of the good sponsor that there are no conditions imposed? The FIRB, at its own whim and caprice, can simply delegate this to the IPAs. In other words, can I have an accurate reading of paragraph B? The final proviso.
Yes. So first question His Honor asked is whether the IPA's decision is recommendatory to the FIRB. The answer is yes, because the
Yes.
final say is with the FIRB.
Yes.
And then on the second question, His Honor asked about the power of FIRB to delegate to the IPAs or to the technical group these powers. And my response is yes, their delegation of power would be guided by the following, which is actually in Section B. It says taking into consideration factors such as but not limited to level or location of investment, type of activity, and fiscal risk. So this is an amendment that this representation made precisely because we are cognizant of the Supreme Court ruling that the delegation of power must have any delegation of power should have standards. And so we put these factors in to guide the FIRB in their delegation of such powers.
Yes, I just wanted to spread that into the record that these are the guidelines under which the delegation must be done. Um, on paragraph C, can the good sponsor spread into the record what is exactly being meant by the FIRB having the power to approve applications for tax subsidies to GOCCs? The way I understand this, tax subsidies are under the budget. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. Mr.
Madam.
President, yes, that power is currently being exercised by FIRB now. So this is not a new power that we are giving. It is being exercised. Itong power to approve application for tax subsidies to GOCCs.
Thank you very much. Yes. On paragraph G, this is the publication of data pertaining to amount of incentives, tax payments, and other related information, including the benefits data. The FIRB is empowered to publish regularly per industry group the said data. Why could the publication be on an enterprise basis?
Yes. Mr. President, the provision of the bill as it stands refers to per industry group.
That's correct. I'm asking for a policy issue, what the sponsor thinks. Can it be on an enterprise basis? In other words, for purposes of transparency, the public, to my mind, must be able to know how much are incentives granted to the company, what are the benefits that the public has derived from that, including number of employment generated. Because if it is published on an industry basis, it is you could not get that kind of a conclusion or data.
Mr. President, from what I understand, DOF originally wanted it to be per enterprise, but I believe this was amended later on. I think it was one of the submissions that I received during Sitira. I can't really recall, but I do recall that there was a discussion on whether it's industry or enterprise, and it ended up as industry, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. What I'm pointing out is that if we want transparency, shouldn't the publication be on an enterprise basis rather than on an industry basis, so that we policymakers will know exactly if the FIRB is doing its job of granting incentives to a particular enterprise given the benefit generated by the public. So that I am saying that is the good sponsor open to an amendment which will require publication on the enterprise level?
Mr. President, like I said, I'm always open. I leave it to the body to make these recommendations, and then we can weigh in on it. DOF originally wanted that, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President.
I'm sorry. What was the last statement, ma'am?
I said, from what I recall, DOF also wanted that the enterprises, Mr. President.
So that is why I'm asking for the position of the good sponsor. Is the good sponsor open to the amendment which would require publication on an enterprise basis?
We are open, Mr. President. I just don't recall the exact reason for when this was introduced. That's why I'm just saying that I'm open, because there might be a reason that I just cannot recall now that I need to spread into the record later on. But at the right time, His Honor can make the amendment. We are open, Mr. President.
Yes, expect that to be one of my amendments, Mr. President, that the publication of the incentives granted should be on a per enterprise basis, rather because it doesn't give you a clear picture if the data pertaining to amount of the tax incentives is published on an industry basis. You know, you could not monitor exactly where we are. So that
We
is one.
understand.
Yes, I'm asking that question. So we will propose that at the appropriate time. All right. On the can the good okay, Mr. President, help me, Madam Chair, but I read a conflict of jurisdiction between the FIRB and the Department of Finance Secretary. Under the bill, the grant of incentives is under the FIRB, but the power to interpret the incentives is under the Secretary of Finance. So first, if we are not satisfied, for example, with the decision of the of the Secretary of Finance on a particular incentive, do we appeal this to the FIRB? Or where is it? In other words, where is it appealable? Right now, the situation is opinions or opinions under the National Internal Revenue Code is under the exclusive jurisdiction of the BIR Commissioner. But if it comes to the incentives, it is now transferred. That power to interpret is now transferred to the Secretary of Finance. On the other hand, the bill also grants the FIRB broad powers to grant incentives, review incentives granted, a plenary power insofar as the grant of incentives are concerned. So there appears to be a conflict to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. President, insofar as what appears to my simple mind as a conflict of jurisdiction between the FIRB and the DOF.
Okay. Actually, Mr. President, I was also studying that, but I think the answer is quite simple. After I reviewed it, I was comfortable with the balance of powers, Mr. President. So the power to interpret provisions of the tax code and other tax laws is lodged with the Commissioner of the Internal Revenue, but subject to review by the Secretary of Finance. And that is the basis is Section 4 of the NIRC, Mr. President. No? So Commissioner of Internal Revenue and subject to review of the Secretary of Finance. Meanwhile, the FIRB is tasked to provide policy and oversight over tax incentives. And we know that this is chaired by the DOF. Thus, the Secretary of Finance is the proper government official to interpret this when we take into consideration the NIRC law.
I'm sorry, but it's a little. I'm sorry, but I may not possess that kind of intelligence to follow the explanation of the good sponsor. What I can see is that the FIRB is granted quasi-judicial powers to, quote, decide on issues after due hearing concerning the approval, disapproval, cancellation, suspension, withdrawal, or forfeiture of tax incentives or tax subsidy in accordance with this act. And yet, in another provision, it grants it removes from BIR commissioner the power to render opinions and rulings insofar as incentives are concerned, and transferring this to the Secretary of Finance. In actual practice and in applying this on these provisions, is the opinion of the Secretary of Finance appealable to the FIRB insofar as incentives are concerned?
Yeah. Mr. President, as I mentioned, the decision of the Secretary of Finance is appealable to the CTA.
Even if it involves the grant of incentives?
Mr. President, let's be clear about this. If we are talking about the interpretation of the Secretary of Finance on the tax provisions on incentives, then that is appealable to the CTA. If we are discussing, so I just want to make that clear. No? So we're talking about interpretations, okay? That is appealable to the CTA. Now, if we are discussing the application for incentives, that is the power of the FIRB to approve or to deny. And if they deny it, then that one is appealable to the CTA by way of petition on certiorari, Mr. President.
I still do not see the clear lines of jurisdiction between the FIRB and the Secretary of Finance. If the Secretary of Finance says a particular industry is not eligible for incentives, to whom is or to which body is the opinion appealable?
Okay. Mr. President, to say that a enterprise is not eligible is a denial. So that is the job of the FIRB. If we are talking about the
No, wait.
wording in our law,
Hold it there. That is the job of the FIRB. So how does the Secretary of Finance exercise its power to interpret the incentives provision of the NIRC?
the wording of the law itself, Mr. President, how the words of the provisions are structured and what is the interpretation. If there's a difference of interpretation there, then it is the Secretary of Finance who will weigh in on that.
It's the, okay, if there's difference in interpretation, it's the Secretary of Finance. Suppose on the basis of that interpretation, the applicant or the concerned party now asks for incentives under the FIRB. Can the FIRB make a ruling different from that of the Secretary of Finance? When? And just to point out, Madam Chair, the incongruity of the situation, because the FIRB is also chaired by the Secretary of Finance.
Mr. President, if we are speaking of an actual application, then it is the FIRB who makes a decision.
Right. The FIRB makes the actual decision. Suppose that question has been resolved by the Secretary of Finance exercise of his powers to interpret the law. Adversely rendered an opinion adverse to the request for incentives. Is that a grant of that denial of the grant of incentive appealable to the FIRB through an application of the FIRB for these incentives? May I request that this particular provision be reviewed carefully by the good sponsor rather than simply, it's just an easy question, and maybe the good sponsor can review the provision, this particular.
Actually, Mr. President, we're very open to amendments. If this representation is always happy to accept amendments that will clarify the intention. So if His Honor would like to propose, we are very open. I'm simply explaining, Mr. President, my understanding, but I always say that if my understanding may not be the common understanding, by all means, help me craft something clearer. Because in my mind, it's a policy direction. Like if this bill is not, if the law is not clear on what the incentive is granted, then that is the Secretary of Finance jurisdiction to decide on that. Now, if there's an application and it will now be denied because of a previous interpretation, it's the FIRB who will do that denial. But it was probably made based on that interpretation that the secretary made
That
before.
is why, so that is why, Madam, Mr. President, the secretary in that situation will review his own decision. The secretary makes an opinion. This is not satisfactory. It is appealed to the FIRB. The FIRB, the decision of the FIRB, the the Secretary of Finance will participate as chairman, and therefore, in effect, the chairman or the Secretary of Finance will be reviewing his own decision as chairman of the FIRB. That's what I'm
Mr.
pointing.
President, I don't understand his honor's question because we don't have a provision here where we make an
Okay,
appeal to the secretary.
I'll
That's
try
what-
to make myself clearer. Under the law, who has the authority to interpret the provisions of the law insofar as the incentives are concerned? Under the Internal Revenue Code, it is the Commissioner on Internal Revenue which has the power to interpret the provisions of the tax code. But by specific provision under Section 3, if I recall correctly, the Secretary of Finance is given the authority to interpret the incentives granted. Is that not correct?
Okay. So the distinction, Mr. President, I understand what his honor is pointing out, but our understanding as sponsor is that the distinction we make is that the Secretary of Finance has the power to interpret the incentives, the tax incentives under CREATE. Now, if it is other provisions of the NIRC, then that is the Secretary of Finance. Then that is the Commissioner of Internal Revenues.
I'm sorry, but I couldn't understand the distinction being put on the record by the good sponsor.
I can repeat, Mr. President. It's simple, but I would like to try to repeat it if it doesn't come across that way. So under the existing NIRC, the Commissioner of Internal Revenue interprets the provisions of the tax code and tax laws.
That's correct.
We are now carving out CREATE. Tax incentives under CREATE will now be interpreted by the Secretary.
Okay, yes, stop. I fully agree with you insofar as that is concerned. My problem is when it's actual application of, for example, the company or the person who requested for that interpretation did not agree with the interpretation. Where does he go or she go? To the Court of Tax Appeals? Or to the IRB?
Yeah, Mr. President, the clear intention of the bill is for that person or that entity to go to the CPA, because if their question is on the interpretation that was made by the secretary, they will go to the CPA.
All right. And if the interpretation now would involve the actual application or on the grant or the denial of the incentive, where does she go? Or where does the party go?
Mr. President, for as long as the basis of the denial was on the interpretation of the secretary, they would still go to the CTA. In any case, that denial would state that it's based on this provision, the interpretation of this provision. So it would be clear that they would go to the CTA.
Well, okay, let that interpretation stay on the record, but I don't think I don't think that the conflict in the jurisdiction is resolved by that. Um, what will happen in cases with a tax subsidy? I'm referring now to paragraph E. What will happen in cases where a tax subsidy is provided in the charter of the GOCC or the SUC? Specifically, for example, pursuant to Section 13, Paragraph 2 of PD 1869 or the PAGCOR Charter, the PAGCOR is subject to the franchise tax of 5% on the gross revenue. The exemptions by decision of the Supreme Court inures to the benefit of the licensees. Now, what will happen now if can the FIRB now amend the ruling insofar as the grant of incentives is concerned to the licensees of PAGCOR?
Licensees. Hindi naman ano si Pangkor, di ba? Mr. President, if PAGCOR is considered a GOCC, which it is from what I know,
Yes.
then they are currently already subject to FIRB. Let me double check my response though to be very clear about it, Mr. President.
We can have a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Ano tong subsidies? Okay, I thought he was talking about. Yes, Mr. President, I confirm that that is within the powers of the FIRB to approve applications for tax subsidies of government-owned and controlled corporations, government instrumentalities, government commissaries, and state universities and colleges.
The FIRB can review and alter the subsidy franchise tax of the PAGCOR, which inures to the benefit of the licenses by the Supreme Court decision. In other words, the licensees now of PAGCOR enjoys an incentive of a 5% franchise tax on gross revenues. Just for clarification, this can be revised by the FIRB.
Yeah, Mr. President, the power specifically granted refers to the application for tax subsidies to government-owned and controlled corporation. It does not refer to the review and amendment of their specific franchise or the grant of tax incentives there, Mr. President. So it's not intended to be covered by CREATE in that sense.
Yeah, I just wanted, I have no particular opinion here. I just want to spread it to the record what is the intention of the sponsor. 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, I have a proposal to the good sponsor. Can the good sponsor review and give us a more simplified granting of incentives, the period of availment, the location, etc.? Because honestly, Mr. President, this is so complicated that this is good stuff for the lawyers to try to interpret what it is all about. Because you have there are 5 types of incentives. There are several types of several periods of availment. There are conditions as to based on location and industry. In addition, the president has the power to review all of this. Pwede ho ba mas simple? I have manifested this previously that it is so complicated that it might be a disincentive by itself. But I submit that to the good sponsor. Is it possible for the good sponsor, since she has been studying this, to come up with a simpler system? Or
Mr.
is it
President, I hear his honor, because what I had to do personally is write on top of that with the number of years. So when our colleagues ask question, the number of years is there automatically. So my recommendation would be to already put the numbers in the chart. So when you look at it, tier 1 activity, tier 2, tier 3, and then the location is here. And then you already know kung saan magtutugma yan, that's the number of years. So I will give his honor, I will capture this by phone even preliminarily, but then I will ask it to be given to all our colleagues, Mr. President, if my idea, it simplifies it.
we are requesting that the law itself be simplified, if that's
Mr.
possible.
President, what my point is, that chart that you see now in the bill, I superimpose the number of years that would be covered by the grant there, so that when you look at it, it would already show you the number of years. It would be easy to see tier 1, location 1, what's that number? That's the number of years. That's how I want it to appear, Mr. President. I will present it, Mr. President.
Okay. Okay. So it will be part of the bill, of the law.
Mr. President, yes, that is my objective also, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, because talaga pong pasensya na kayo pero nahihirapan na kung umintindi nitong mga tungkol sa batas na ito. Okay, just on section 296, page 23 of the bill. It says, and let me read it, the location of the registered project or activity shall be prioritized according to the economic level of development as follows. Number 1, less developed areas as determined by NEDA. 2, areas outside the NCR and outside of metropolitan areas and other areas that are not less developed. Number 3, areas outside of and contiguous or adjacent to NCR and areas outside of and contiguous or adjacent to the metropolitan areas. May we know what is the difference between number 2 and number 3? Hindi ko po maintindihan.
Yes, Mr. President. I can explain that, Mr. President.
Please, yes.
Let me explain it from bottom down, no? The most developed areas are NCR and the other metropolitan. Yun yung number 4. So they receive the least incentives.
Before you proceed further, ma'am, can we just specify what are other metropolitan areas so that the law is complete without guessing what these are or leaving it to interpretation? From your previous answers, I recall that the metropolitan areas would be Cebu and Davao.
Yes, that Mr. President was also my thought. But then, Mr. President, this may change over time. And as we know that this kind of laws are really not meant to be amended that frequently. Pero if an area is deemed to be a metropolitan area by NEDA or as indicated in our Philippine Development Plan, then there is a chance that it would change, Mr. President. That is the reason for not including the others. Maybe we can, but I am amenable to saying here, tatlo lang naman ho, NCR, Cebu, and Davao, and then and any future any as indicated by NEDA in the PDP, something like that. We're
Yes,
amenable, Mr. President.
without prejudice to NEDA, adding metropolitan areas where public interest requires. In other words, where
Yes.
you can add other metropolitan areas where the incentive will be least because we want to disperse the industries outside of the NCR and metropolitan area.
Yes, Mr. President, we are very amenable to wording similar to that.
Yeah. So now can I ask the question, what is the difference between number 2 and number 3?
Yes. So number three first. So imagine NCR is the NCR and Metropolitan is the least incentivized. Next would be the areas right outside of those metropolitan areas defined. So let's use NCR as an example. Right outside NCR, and they are contiguous or adjacent to NCR. So that would be Bulacan, Laguna, I think Cavite, katabi lang ho, katabi ng NCR.
Okay.
And then in the case of Cebu, kung ano yung katabi ng Cebu, katabi ng Davao.
Okay.
And adjacent. Okay? We have a list actually, Mr. President. So for Cebu, that would include Cebu City, Lapu-Lapu, right outside of Metro Cebu would be Danau City, Naga City, Toledo City, Carmen. I can give the complete list, but visually, I think His Honor understands what I'm explaining, that it's outside but contiguous to that metropolitan area defined. Can I proceed with the next?
Yes.
The next one would be areas outside of NCR and outside of those metropolitan areas and all other areas that are other areas that are not less developed. So, meaning to say, Mr. President, labas pa dun sa dinefine ko na Bulacan, Laguna, Cavite, but not yet dun sa last, which is the first here, that is the most less developed. So it's simple. NCR, ito yon. The next level would be yung mga nakadikit. The third level would be, well, in this case, the second level would be right around that. And the final one would be the less developed, Mr. President. And we have a listing that His Honor can look at.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, just wanted to spread that into the record. Now, just a few more questions on Section 295, paragraph C2. This is on the conditions for the availment of duty exemption. Section 295 in effect says that after a period of 5 years, the sale, transfer, or even after a period of 5 years, the sale, transfer, or disposition of capital equipment, which enjoyed duty-free privileges, or would still be liable to pay the duties based on the net value of the capital equipment if the enterprise has violated any of its registration terms and conditions. Can we qualify this to say material violation? In other words, it must be this substantial.
Yes, of course, Mr. President.
Simple violation, because this can expose registered enterprise to a lot of harassment.
Yes, Mr. President, we accept, we agree.
Okay, good. Um, on section 301 is the power of the president to grant incentives. In substance, it provides that the president may modify the mix or the period or manner of availment of incentives provided under this code for a highly desirable project or science-specific industrial activity. I can see that we would want to grant the president as much leeway as possible. Is that the purpose, Madam Sponsor?
Mr. President, what was the last statement? What the purpose? I'm
The
sorry.
purpose is to provide flexibility in case of desirable investments which are outside of those enumerated.
That is correct, Mr. President.
Now, I can see that there are conditions that are being attached before the president can exercise that authority. And it says the project has a comprehensive sustainable development plan with clear, inclusive business approaches and innovations, and two, minimum investment of $1 billion or a minimum direct local employment generation of at least 10,000 within 3 years. Just for the record, these are mandatory conditions so that the FIRB cannot recommend the exercise by the president of these powers unless these conditions are met. As a limitation on the broad powers of the president to grant the incentives, which is a delegated power, which is otherwise the power of the legislature. All I'm just saying is under 301, section 301, we are just saying that the FIRB cannot recommend to the president the grant of incentives to those which are not covered unless it satisfies the conditions stated here. So that if the incentives are granted without one or more or without the conditions herein granted or conditions herein specified, the exercise of that power can be in abuse of that discretion, which can be nullified, just to be clear.
Yes, I thank His Honor for that question. I had to review the wording of the provision carefully because I know that the intention is, and I just confirmed it with DOF technical staff here, that yes, the intention is those conditions must be present. Although this is an old, diba? And but when I read it, it doesn't sound like it said shall consider. So I will propose a amendment to the wording that would make sure that it is clear that those are requirements.
And if those requirements are not met or are not present, there can be no recommendation, and that exercise of authority cannot be is possible.
Yes, yes, that is clear, Mr. President. So there will be no recommendation unless those conditions are met. But just to point out that the investment of $1 billion and the employment of 10,000, that is that is not N. So it's really the sustainability plan plus either the employment or the 1 billion. That is the time that they can make a recommendation.
Mm-mm. Okay, yes. I can end my interpretation here There will be amendments that I will introduce later, which may merit some explanation. But just one point, very important. Section 4, which amends Section 20 of the NIRC, which refers to submission of tax-related information to the DOF. It provides that the Commissioner shall, upon the order of the Secretary of Finance, specifically identifying the needed information and justification for such order, furnish the Secretary pertinent taxpayers' information, provided that the Secretary and the relevant officers handling such specific information shall be covered by the provisions of Section 270, unless the taxpayer consents in writing to such disclosures. In substance, as presently provided, the taxpayers' information may not be revealed publicly by the Commissioner. That includes the Secretary of Finance. But here, the Secretary or the BIR Commissioner is obligated to furnish the Secretary with the pertinent taxpayers' information. My only suggestion is that we should limit the disclosure to entities which are applying for or are receiving incentives under the law, instead of a blanket authority from the Secretary of Finance to require tax information from the BIR.
Yes, I agree that we limit it to that, Mr. President.
Because that's the intention. Those who are asking for incentives must be open to examination. But the way it is worded, it is so open-ended. So thank you for that. We have that's the end of our interpretation. As we said, in the course of the amendment, we may propose some amendments which could be accepted or rejected by the good sponsor, depending on the explanation and the debates that we will have. So thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much to the Minority Floor Leader. I appreciated his input, and I also do believe that we agree on many of the concerns. And there may just be a few that we have a different appreciation of, but I believe that the ultimate objective is the same. Thank you very much to the Minority Floor Leader, and thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you, Minority Leader, the sponsor, Senator Cayetano. Majority
Mr.
Leader.
President, Mr. President, I believe Senator Amy Marcos would like to make a manifestation before we tackle the amendments.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Majority Leader and my good President. I would like to make a quick manifestation as the chairperson of the Committee on Economic Affairs. I speak once again on behalf of our exporters who will bear the brunt of the so-called rationalization of the tax incentives. It is the same export sector which has radically contracted for the past 5 months, diminishing by a full 49.9% last April. Already, PESA has reported $6.6 billion or 29 billion pesos in decreases in investments, substantial reductions in their imports, and 60,379 workers who have lost their jobs from March to June of this year. As of September 2020, while 373,338 workers continued working in their different employer companies, these companies never actually produced or operated, and are now perilously at risk of closing even as the COVID crisis continues. Meanwhile, the electronics export industry lost close to 90 million US dollars in exports in the month of July alone. While these factories have so far retained most of their workers, the semiconductor industry anticipates thousands of layoffs next year as investors unwind existing plants and freeze any further investments. The garment sector, which employs 280,000 workers, retrenched a full 19% of all their workers through the second quarter of this year, as their export orders plummeted by 40 to 45%. Cebu's famed sports city, the manufacturers and exporters of Adidas, as well as almost all other major brands, has retrenched 4,800 workers. This is one factory alone, decimating its workforce of 21,000 workers. While the BPO sector appears unaffected on the surface, with its workforce still intact, this sector has incurred enormous new expenses affecting work-from-home arrangements, mandatory shuttle services, health protocols, and on-site accommodation for hundreds of their personnel. An additional deprivation of tax incentives would render our country costly and uncompetitive as a destination. These are tough times indeed, yet the Department of Finance says we should be still tougher. The abrogation of perpetual tax deductions has been enjoined to put an end to violations and those violating companies. But in fact, who are these violators and what are these violations? Despite repeated queries, the BOI has been unable to cite a single charge of such tax abuses. In fact, the prime IPA, PEZA, asserts there is no case of the abuse of said incentives because, they explain, incentives are given not to companies but to products, new product development, new technology, and expansion for additional investment. Have we contrived for ourselves an incentive bogeyman with which to bedevil each other and convolute our export incentives? Is the alleged abuse of the perpetual GIE of 5% nothing more than a self-inflicted nightmare, hardly a genuine threat? After all is said and done, how much do we seek to raise by denying exporters these incentives? And how much more do we risk losing from the exodus of the investors, jobs, and foreign currency as a result? Given all these fundamental questions left unsettled, this representation urges, if not the outright deferment of the so-called rationalization of tax incentives on constitutional grounds, then at the very worst, the review of Section 12 of the present draft of CREATE, which seeks to amend Section 312 of the amended NIRC to the inclusion of the grandfather clause for existing investors as espoused by many of our senator colleagues. Like others, may I request the clarification of the ambiguities of Section 296 of the amended NIRC with a step-by-step delineation of the process by which older firms can reapply for their lapsed original incentives. Are we certain of the provision in Section 297B delegating the grant of incentives to the new all-powerful FIRB's technical committee, adding yet another layer to hapless investors, different and above the more experienced and familiar IPAs? The great Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, John Marshall, warned, "The power to tax is the power to destroy." Let us not destroy the factories and corporations who have persisted through the years in manufacturing, in services, finishing, and kitting here with us in the Philippines. Let us support those intrepid exporters who have struggled with us for decades and through the COVID pandemic to employ hundreds of thousands of Filipinos. Let us protect those investors who generously retooled at great personal cost their own operations to produce for our protection face masks, shields, gowns, and hazmats to be given to our health workers and the general population. In this pandemic, we must indeed take care of each other more and tax each other less, whether Filipino worker or foreign investor. And if indeed, as the Finance Department has repeatedly asserted, CREATE is the first revenue reduction tax measure in the world, so be it. A mutual sacrifice of a compassionate and humane government seeking only to lessen the burden of its already plagued and suffering people. Thank you, and may I, in the period of amendments, later submit my proposals, Mr. President and Madam Sponsor. Thank you very much.
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. With that, no other member wishes to interpolate. We move to Senator Ralph Rector would like to be recognized, Mr. President, before we move to the period of amendments.
Yes, thank you, Majority Leader. Yes, thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
Prepared to propose the amendments after I ask one last question to the sponsor with regard to one last issue. With the permission of the sponsor, would she be willing to answer?
Of course,
the last question?
willing to try to answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. Madam Sponsor, do we have any available data specifically on how much taxes have been collected based on Section 116 of the tax code? How much have we collected from the collection of 3% tax on persons exempt from VAT or those with an annual gross sale or receipt of not exceeding 3 million? Would we have that data, Madam Sponsor?
We are checking, Mr. President, with DOF.
Yes.
Today, later. Mr. President, they will submit. I said it should be today because we hope to be able to move forward. So they said they will submit.
Okay, so we don't have the present data, no?
We don't have right now, but we can get back to His Honor to check what time it can be made available, if ever.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that it? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with that, no other member wishes to manifest or to interpolate the measure. We move to close the period of interpolation, Mr. President. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpolation is closed.
Mr. President, I believe I spoke briefly to the sponsor. I believe she has a number of amendments as committee amendments. So to our colleagues who wish to propound amendments, maybe we can allow her to propose first her amendments. And therefore, it might so it doesn't duplicate the other amendments of our colleagues as she accepted several amendments. So with that, Mr. President, I move to open the period of amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of amendments open.
Maybe recognize the sponsor for her committee amendment. Actually, individual amendments, but she's the one who's going to sponsor, Mr. President, these amendments.
Mr. President.
Yeah. Before we recognize Senator Cayetano, the Minority Leader is recognized.
Yes. May I request that I assume there will be a number of amendments. Can we defer action on the proposed amendments until we are given an opportunity to be given a copy electronically of the amendments proposed so that we can study them before it is acted upon. We will, as long as we get it tonight, tomorrow we can state our position. All we're requesting is that the acceptance or rejection of the proposed amendments be done tomorrow after we are apprised of these amendments. This is not an easy law, Mr. President.
Mr. President, in considering the time involved, may we ask, because the amendments we have now, I was explaining it to the majority floor leader, and I'm happy to explain to the minority floor leader and to the body. The amendments that we will be reading into the record now are very practically typographical and style amendments, which are really very minor. I don't mind being interrupted, but they're very minor. And then, Mr. President, we will read the amendments that we accepted coming from the senators. And we have already chosen those that are really It's no problem with DOF, no problem with me as the sponsor. So they should be non-contentious. If I may suggest, if it's okay with the minority floor leader, as I read them, obviously, as I said, I have accepted them in principle. We can still delay, His Honor can still interject tomorrow, if he sees something there that should be reconsidered. I am very open to that. But there's around 17 right now that I'd just like to dispose of. And then subject to further, I'm okay to reopening it. But just so I can move it along, because, dear colleagues, I still have more that I still am working on, because I'm trying not to reject your amendment, so I'm trying to edit it so that we can come to a compromise. And then there are some that are still submitting today. So I hope you understand na I'm just trying to move this along further. And then obviously there are like 4 or 5 major issues that have to be resolved. So would that be okay?
And you have no intentions of taking up those 4 or 5 major issues today?
No, I don't think so, Mr.
Yes.
President. We will already
So
take enough time.
Yes, therefore, the appeal of the sponsor, Senator Cayetano, is that she be allowed to continue with the minor amendments, and there is nothing preventing that will prevent any of us, particularly also the minority leader, tomorrow, because we will not be closing the period of amendments. And perhaps if these are minor amendments, we may allow her to do so.
On that premise, Mr. President, I have no problems. We can proceed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Senator Recto, Mr. President.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. I have no problem also with the request of the sponsor. But since we will have to study also those amendments, would it be okay that I present? We were prepared to present our amendments today, but since there will be other amendments, can we present our amendments tomorrow, page by page, Mr. President? Because we already
we can do that after the sponsor first presents the minor amendments today. And then
Correct.
we ask for a clean copy that be distributed by tomorrow morning.
Okay,
And
thank you.
tomorrow afternoon, we can go page by page.
Page by page. Thank you very much.
All
And
right.
one more thing, Mr. President, on
Yes.
that note, I failed to include that the Senate President Pro Temp and I also spoke earlier, and we were also going to use this time today at some point to also discuss his amendments. In principle, no, because I know all of it most likely, well, the major ones, he mentioned there were some minor, there's some major. The major ones would have to be discussed with all of you anyway. But if we can simplify that process and agree on some points, then we save time also. So may I just confer now with the Senate President Pro Temp that after I do this 17 amendments, which should be fairly simple, then maybe I can suspend the minority, the Senate President Pro Temp and I can then discuss. And then I think I'm pretty much done for the day unless His Honor and I want to put something on record and the majority floor leader can take up other things. At least I disposed of the easy ones, and then I will have time to discuss with the Senate President Pro Temp and have time to discuss still, honestly, quite a few others coming from our colleagues that are not really contentious, but I cannot say yes to it in its present form.
All right.
With the permission of the Senate President and the Majority Leader, if it will be all right with the sponsor, if the sponsor will make the amendments today, and if she would be willing that we can discuss our proposed amendments, if it's fine with her, tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in the Senate, if that's okay with you.
I have to get back to you, Mr. President. I'm not sure if I'm available at 10 a.m. No, but most likely closer to noon time. I just also have to check because I might need to have discussions with DOF as well. So,
Yes.
and I did not block off. I did not clear my schedule for the morning yet, Mr. President. But again, another thought, because I know His Honor is in the Senate right now. Can we
Yes.
reverse this also? Would His Honor like to discuss with me for even, let's just put a time limit, 30 minutes, and allow the majority floor leader to take up other things, and then let's discuss what we think we can for half an hour in the lounge, and then just leave it at that and continue tomorrow? Would that be okay?
That's fine with me. That's fine with me.
Okay. So, Majo, I will ask for a suspension now. And meanwhile, for those who want to keep track, we will give you a copy of the amendments that I'll be reading. So it will be simpler for all of you. These are the simple
Well,
ones, as I said.
If these are the simple ones, why don't we do it now? Why don't you do it now? And then thereafter, you can talk with the President Pro Tem.
Okay naman ako, kaya lang I'm not sure kung kaya pa niya akong antayin. Kung aantayin niya ako, I would prefer to do it that way. Would that be okay?
That will be fine. That will be fine,
Okay, thank
Mr.
you.
President.
Then we'll proceed, Mr. President.
All right. So the period of amendment is open. The sponsor is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just set up. It is in my the laptop. So, dear colleagues, I will mention the page number. You can follow as we go along. Please feel free to tell me to slow down or to repeat as needed. Mr.
Okay.
President, on page 4, line 28, delete the phrase projected deficit target and replace it with actual deficit level. I submit.
Line
28.
28. Any objection? Hearing
Can,
none.
sir, can we,
Of course. Page 4, line 28.
yes,
Delete the phrase projected deficit target
yes.
and replace it with actual deficit level.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Mr. President, just point of order.
Senator Recto.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. Yeah, I just have a query on this. I may have an amendment on this particular issue tomorrow. If we adopt it, can we still go back to it tomorrow?
Yes,
Yes, of course.
yes.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. Just a clarification.
Yes, I have no problem also with that, dear colleagues.
All right.
So next is page 6. I will wait for you to find the page. I will wait for the minority floor
Okay.
leader's confirmation. Page 6,
Yes.
line 31.
Mhm.
Okay. Delete the phrase projected deficit target and replace it with actual deficit level. Submit.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Thank you. I move on. Page 9.
Page 9.
I repeat, page 9, line 2.
Line 2.
Delete the
Same.
phrase projected deficit target and replace it with actual deficit level. I submit.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Next would be page 12.
Page 12.
Line 43. 43.
43.
Parang bingo.
Mm.
Delete the word hiring and replace it with gainful employment. This is a submission of Senator Pimentel.
Gainful
Employment.
employment. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next is page 16 and then line 14.
Mhm.
After the word employees,
Mhm.
insert that are directly related to the production of goods or performance of services under the registered project or activity, and that are of a technical nature which shall develop or improve the specific skills or practical knowledge of the employee, especially in the mechanical, industrial arts, scientific field, or practical science of a particular position or job function in the registered project or activity.
And continue with whose work is directly,
Yes,
etc.
and then continue with,
Yeah. All right.
I continue by deleting the following,
Mm.
whose work is directly
Ah.
related to the production of goods or performance of services under the registered project or activity and which shall improve the specific skill or knowledge of the employee required in his or her current employment, submitted by Senator Pimentel.
You are deleting from the word who's up to employment, and what you read is to replace
The
that.
replacement, yes, Mr.
Alright.
President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. The next is on page 18,
Page 18,
line 35.
35.
I will just give time for the others to follow. Page 18, line 35. Mabilis si Senate President. After the word entity, insert, and shall be limited to local expenditure incurred for salaries of Filipino employees and consumables, and payment to local research and development organizations. Submitted by Senator Pimentel.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 23, line 14,
14.
after the word areas, delete as determined by the National Economic Development Authority. And in the same page, line 22, after areas,
Wait.
it's actually a replacement, Mr. President.
Yeah, but it's on line 14.
So I'll take it one at a time.
Yeah, you will therefore place a semicolon after areas, correct?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. President.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, adopted. And then?
And then on the same page, line 22, after areas, insert the sentence, the metropolitan areas and the less developed areas shall be determined by the National Economic Development Authority. Submitted by Senator Pimentel.
Again, will you repeat the sentence? It's on page 23, line 22, after the word areas.
Insert the sentence, the metropolitan areas and the less developed areas shall be determined by the National Economic Development Authority.
Period. Any
Period.
objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 24,
Page 24.
line 7,
7. Okay.
after the word forestry, add the phrase agribusiness, comma, and other activities. And after the term services, delete the word activities.
Okay.
We submit from Senator
Services,
Pangilinan.
period.
Yes.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Next, Mr. President, is still on page 24.
Whose amendment was that?
Sorry, Senator Pangilinan.
I see. Okay, proceed.
On page 24, also an amendment of Senator Pangilinan, line 10. After the phrase state-of-the-art technologies, insert the phrase technologies that are available in other countries but not yet available or widely used in the Philippines. Senator Pangilinan and Cayetano.
All right, any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you. Next item, still on page 24, line 15.
Line 15.
After the word jobs, insert the phrase and manufacturing of FDA-approved investigational drugs, comma, medicines and medical devices, period. Senator Tolentino.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next is on line 28.
Page 28.
Sorry,
Line 28.
Sorry, page 28. Line 20.
Line 20.
After the word act, insert the Fiscal Incentives Review Board shall decide on the matter within 90, open parenthesis, close the number 90 days from the date when the Fiscal Incentives Review Board declares the issue submitted for resolution. Period. A business
No. You want a comma after act on line 20. or a period?
Period,
You
Mr.
want a
President. Period,
Okay,
yes.
and then what you read.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So the last word I read was submitted for resolution, period. A
Yeah.
business, and to be continued, a
Go
business
ahead.
enterprise adversely affected by the decision of the Fiscal Incentives Review Board may, within 30, open parenthesis, the numbers 30, close parenthesis, days from receipt of the adverse decision, appeal the same to the Court of Tax Appeals, period. Submitted by Senator Pimentel.
Semicolon, I suggest.
Sorry, semicolon, Mr. President, yes.
Correct. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you. Next is page 31.
31.
Line 6.
Line 6.
Delete the word or.
Mhm.
That's all, Mr. President. Submitted by Senator Pangilinan.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Also on page 31, line 8, delete the period
Mhm.
after the word competitiveness and add the phrase semicolon or. Submitted by Senator Pangilinan.
Okay. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
And still on page 31, after line 8, add another item to the enumeration which reads, number 8 in open close parentheses, contribution to Philippine food security and increase incomes in the agriculture and fisheries sector, period. Submitted by Senator Pangilinan.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Can I have a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Okay. Okay.
You're still on page 31?
No more, Mr. President. We are going back because Senator Joel decided that I can proceed with his amendment. So we will no longer be in chronological order because I'll include his amendment, which was taken out earlier. Are we ready? Mr. President, I need a minute suspension because we're putting it back. A minute suspension, please.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, on page 10,
Page 10.
these are Senator Villanueva's amendments.
Go ahead.
Line 16,
16.
under the section A, quote expenses, quote subsection 1, ordinary and necessary trade, business, or professional expenses, we propose to add a new subsection, A.V.
A2.
A5 pala, sorry. A5. A letter V5. A new
letter
subsection,
V.
Mr. President.
Okay.
Okay. So I will read that new subsection now. 5.5B? Ano ba yun, V? Okay. But
Wait,
is that V? Is that a V?
A is expenses, and then under A, you have number 1, and then next is supposed to be B, interest, and number 1 in general. Where do you want this?
Mr. President, if you look at, because this is an NIRC amendment, so if you look at the bill, after XXX, hindi na ho nakopya doon, di ba? Hindi natin we do not complete the
Yeah.
whole. So it will go there, Mr. President.
Okay, yes.
Pero V ba dyan? Yeah. So letter V, I will proceed.
Letter
V.
D as in
V
dog.
as in victory.
V as in victory. All right.
Yes, Mr. President. An additional deduction from taxable income of 1/2, parentheses, open parentheses, the numbers 1/2, close parentheses, of the value of labor training expenses incurred for skills development of enterprise-based trainees enrolled in public senior high schools, public higher education institutions, or public technical and vocational institutions, and duly covered by an apprenticeship agreement under Presidential Decree number 442, Series of 1974, or the Labor Code of the Philippines as amended, shall be granted to enterprises, period, provided further that for the additional deduction for enterprise-based training of students from public educational institutions, the enterprise shall secure proper certification from the Department of Education, open parenthesis, DepEd, close parenthesis, comma, Technical Education and Skills Development Authority, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, TESDA, comma, or Commission on Higher Education, open parenthesis, CHED, close parenthesis, period. Provided lastly, that such deduction shall not exceed 10% of direct labor wage. Submitted by Senator Joel Villanueva.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President. On page 34,
34. Go ahead.
line 38, after the term job creation, insert including information on quality of jobs and hiring of foreign and local workers. We submit from Senator Joel Villanueva.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, that is all for the simple amendments. There are more, dear colleagues, that I am still trying to work on, either style or substance, to adopt what you have submitted. I will also be prepared to explain those that we cannot accept at this point in time. And then, as discussed, we will proceed with a discussion with the Senate President Pro Temp. So we can suspend for now. I think for the depends on the Senate President. If I'm ready with the others and we have a few minutes, I might have a few amendments more to include. But that shouldn't
No,
be.
you can do it now, and then perhaps you can when we suspend, or we can adjourn, and you can discuss with the Senator Recto, and we can resume tomorrow.
Yeah. Right now, Mr. President, I do not have anything anymore to add right now until I spend time with my staff to go through the new amendments submitted and the others that I have not been able to edit subject to style or some substance.
All
So
right.
no more right now, Mr. President.
All right. So in
Mr.
that
President?
case, we give the decision to the majority leader.
Yes, Mr. President, maybe if it's possible, if we have some time today, just a little bit of time, maybe we can already approve the emergency power bills that we authored, Mr. President. Since I think it's very self-explanatory, it's a one-page document, actually a two-page document. Maybe if it's possible, we can approve it already for second reading, Mr. President.
In the meantime, we can suspend so that
Yes.
the Senator Cayetano and the President Pro Temp can confer.
Yes, Mr. President. With that, we move to suspend Senate Bill number 1357 under Committee Report number 50.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 1357 is suspended in the meantime.
We recognize our Minority Floor Leader, Mr. President.
Just a
Leader
request.
recognized.
Yes, just a request, Mr. President. If it pleases our Senate President Pro Tempore and the good sponsor, Once you have agreed on between the sponsor and Senator Recto, after they have come to an agreement on the proposed amendments of Senator Recto, can we be given a copy of these amendments so that we can react when it is presented on the floor? Rather than hearing about it for the first time when it is presented, if we can have an advance copy of the amendments, as I assume it will be substantial, and in fairness, we want to have time to review the amendments, even if it's agreed upon already by the good sponsor and Senator Rec.
Of course. So
Yeah.
we hereby direct the Senate Secretariat to furnish us first as soon as possible, a clean copy of the presented amendments by the sponsor, Senator Cayetano. And then after the conference of Senator Pia and Senator Ralph Recto, that the minority leader and the other members be furnished a copy of what is agreed upon as proposed amendments, if there are any agreed upon amendments, so that by tomorrow morning or lunchtime, they are ready to have reviewed the proposals, and we can easily tackle it in the afternoon. All right, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with that, we'll take up other matters. Just quickly, Mr. President, I move to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1844. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is approved. 1844's consideration is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, no member had listed to interpolate the measure. I move to close the period of interpolation, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is approved.
Mr. President, move to open the period of amendments.
Period of amendments. Any objection? Hearing none. It's open.
Mr. President, just a few committee amendments, Mr. President. On page 1, line 14, after the acronym DOH and punctuation mark, comma, insert the phrase Philippine Health Insurance Corporation or PhilHealth. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Mr. President, on page 2, line 12, between the words applications and 4, insert the phrase and renewals of, and thereafter delete the preposition for. I so move, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, line 16, delete the period after the word authorizations and replace with a semicolon, and then add the conjunction and. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, after line 16, insert a new paragraph to read as follows. Letter C, in consultation with or upon recommendation of affected government agencies, comma, may prescribe to be permanent the streamlined regulatory processes and procedures, comma, and the suspension or waiver of the requirements in securing permits, comma, licenses, comma, clearances, comma, and certifications or authorizations, semicolon. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Mr. President, to re-letter the subparagraphs accordingly.
So,
I so move, Mr. President, to re-letter the subparagraphs accordingly.
so relettered.
On the same page, after the new paragraph C, insert a new proviso to read as follows. This is an amendment made by Senator Villar and Senator Recto. Provided that the authority herein granted under subparagraphs A, B, and C of this section shall not be used to undermine the existing procedures and processes, comma, under applicable laws, rules, and regulations meant to protect the environment, especially those that aim to safeguard protected areas and its buffer zones and environmentally critical areas, period.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On the same page, lines 19 to 20, between the words remove and any, delete the phrase upon the determination of a competent body and the punctuation mark, comma. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 29, after the word Gazette, remove the conjunction "and" and replace it with the word "or." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
And on the title of the bill, after the word certifications, add the phrase "in times of national emergency." I so move, Mr. President.
In times of national emergency, correct. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
That's all, Mr. President. I have no further committee amendments unless our colleagues would like to add some amendments. Maybe the minority floor leader, or if not,
No.
Mr. President, we move to close the, yes, Mr. President, the
Yes.
minority leader would like to be
Close.
recognized.
We have no amendments, Mr.
No amendments now.
Thank you. So we incorporated most of the discussions we had during our committee hearings, Senator Dulon and SP. We also got the, of course, the amendments given to us by Senator Villar and Senator Recto. So hopefully this measure will really be able to equip the president to act on these delays on certifications, permits, and licenses. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we close the period of amendments.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of amendments closed.
With that, Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1844 under Committee Report number 130. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objections? Hearing none, Senate Bill 1844 is approved on second reading.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to give credit where credit is due. First of all, on our Senate President. Thank you, sir, for attending that meeting. You represented us in the Senate and you brought the message back loud and clear to us. Thank you for also arranging the meeting. And to my dear minority floor leader, who also spearheaded the draft, together with Senator Ralph Recto, our Senate President Pro Temp, and Senator Ping Lacson as well. We thank the good Senator Lacson, as well as all our colleagues that are all co-sponsors and authors of this measure. Hopefully, this will accompany. Yes, Mr.
Do
President.
not forget to mention yourself.
Hindi po. Ano lang po ako, utusan po nyo ako. So, thank you, sir. But
Thank you and congratulate
thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. This is a good accompanying measure to the ease of doing business. I think a lot of good will come out of this, and I believe with this, Mr. President, the president now will be emboldened to remove more people from their ineptitude and their incompetence, Mr. President, government service. So with that, we move to suspend consideration of the measure, and hopefully, Mr. President, we can get a certification para may pasa po ng third reading itong linggo bago tayo umalis.
Please, the Secretariat, please inform the Executive Secretary. He told me that they will issue a certification of urgency on this measure.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Consideration suspended.
So, Mr. President, I believe there's a second reference of business, additional reference of business,
Yes.
if it's all right with the President.
Secretary will proceed with the additional reference of business.
Additional reference of business, bills on first reading, Senate number 1878, an act creating the Environmental Protection and Enforcement Bureau, EPEB, under the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, DNR, providing for its powers and functions and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Binay.
Referred to the Committees on Civil Service, Environment, and Finance.
Senate number 1879, an act strengthening the Philippine Public Library System, amending for the purpose Republic Act number 7743, otherwise known as an act providing for the establishment of congressional, city, and municipal libraries and barangay reading centers throughout the Philippines and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Angara.
Referred to the Committees on Basic Education, Local Government, and Finance.
Resolutions. Senate Joint Resolution number 12, entitled Joint Resolution Authorizing the Use of the Excess Collection of the Bureau of Customs for the year 2020 under the Rice Tarification Law as cash assistance for the rice farmers to be included in the General Appropriations Act GAA 2021, introduced by Senator Villar.
Referred to Committees on Agriculture, Ways and Means, and Finance.
PS Resolution Number 538, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the systemic graft and corruption that has long besieged the National Center for Mental Health, NCMH, and the apparent inaction and inordinate delay of the Office of the Ombudsman on the said complaints despite the renewed calls for their resolution, with the end in view of eliminating such dishonest and illicit activities from the health facility, introduced by Senator De Lima.
To the Committee on all committees on accountability of public officers and health.
PS Resolution Number 539, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the Commission on Audit showing that there are 2.2 billion pesos worth of expired or overstocked drugs, medicines, and other supplies in the inventory of the Department of Health, with and in view of addressing systemic problems in its procurement and distribution mechanisms, thereby maximizing their efficiency, introduced by Senator De Lima.
Well, we're referring this to the Committee on Health, no, but I suggest that the Committee on Health check on the title. Is the resolution want to inquire on the Commission on Audit or the DOH? The first line is not clear. No?
DOH.
On inquiry on the Commission on Audit. Showing never anyway. Refer to the Committee on Health. Go ahead.
PS Resolution Number 540, resolution recognizing and congratulating Jesus is Lord Church for celebrating its 42nd founding anniversary on October 25, 2020, introduced by Senator Angara.
To the Committee on Rules.
PS Resolution Number 541, resolution directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation to evaluate the support, both financial and logistics, provided by the Philippine Sports Commission, PSC, to the country's national athletes, coaches, and trainers, introduced by Senator Angara.
To the Committee on Sports.
PS Resolution Number 542, resolution urging the Commission on Elections, COMELEC, and the Department of Information and Communications Technology, DICT, to devise and install an effective tool that would detect and repel potential foreign interference in elections, and directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the use of social media platforms in propelling foreign interference, with the end in view of safeguarding the 2022 Philippine national elections, introduced by Senator Recto.
To the Committees on Electoral Reforms and Science and Technology.
PS Resolution Number 543, resolution supporting the recommendation of the Interagency Task Force on the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases for the Department of Transportation to resume its pilot study on motorcycle taxi service providers and to provide guidelines for its operation, with the end in view of augmenting public transportation and sustaining government efforts towards economic recovery, introduced by Senator Recto.
To the Committee on Public Services.
Committee Report Number 132, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Energy and Public Services on Senate Number 1877, with Senators Gatchalian and De Lima as authors thereof, entitled An Act Extending and Enhancing the Implementation of the Lifeline Rate, amending for the purpose Section 73 of Republic Act Number 9136, otherwise known as the Electric Power Industry Reform Act 2001, as amended by Republic Act Number 10150, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate Number 1583, sponsor Senator Gatchalian.
Pero report pa rin si Board. Anyway, to the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there was a request earlier by Senator Tiveros if she can tackle her bill on an act protecting children, prohibiting and declaring child marriages as illegal and providing funds and programs and penalties thereof. I want to ask my colleagues, is it all right to still take up, Mr. President, or do you want to take this up tomorrow, Mr. President?
Perhaps if there is a lull, we can take it up tomorrow, unless no one wants to interpolate. We're in the period of interpolation, right?
Yes, sir. We are in the period of interpolation, sir.
What is the age?
Mr. President.
Yes, Senator Tiveros.
Thank you, Mr. President, and with the indulgence of the good majority leader, and thank you to the good majority leader for bringing this up. Indeed, under our agenda for the day, listed under for interpellation, is that Senate Bill number 1373. And I was going to inquire through the good majority leader if, as reflected in the agenda for the day, no one is going to interpellate the bill. Because if that is the case, and still the case at the moment, Mr. President, I was going to inquire if it would be possible to close the period of interpellation, also as one, well, happy way to mark that yesterday was the International Day of the Girl, Mr. President, with Majority Leader.
Well, Majority Leader, are there any manifestations of any interpellation on the subject?
No, Mr. President. Actually, it's a very happy bill.
Yes.
It coincides with our move to curb
This
child
age.
pregnancies and to bring up the age of consent to 16, Mr. President. So
Yes,
maybe yes, Mr. President.
I reviewed the bill. And it conforms with my conservative stance most of the time. So,
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
I'm glad, Mr. President.
So if it's with the permission, Mr. President, we can resume consideration and maybe close the period of interpellation already, Mr. President, if it's all right with the body. Anyway, it's a happy bill. I think this is good for children.
No objection.
Forced marriages. Yes, I so move, Mr. President, to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1373 under committee report number 52. I so
any
move.
objection? Consideration of the measure is in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we recognize our sponsor, Senator Risa Ontiveros. And for the record, Mr. President, we do not have anyone who wishes to interpolate the measure. So I move to close the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of interpellation is closed.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, good majority leader.
Thank you. Senator Gilon would like to be recognized, Mr. President.
Are there
Senator Franklin,
Yes.
Minority Leader.
are there amendments proposed, Mr. President, Mr. Majority Leader?
Are there any committee amendments by the committee?
There are none, Mr. President.
I have one amendment.
Please go ahead, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Yes, we move to open the period of amendments and recognize our distinguished Senate President.
Yeah, can I be made the co-author of the measure?
So gladly, Mr. President. Marami pong salamat.
Me also, Mr. President.
What about the
Of
Minority
course, the
Leader?
good majority leader.
Also, Senator
What about
Joel,
the
Senator
Minority
Aini,
Leader?
Mr.
Senator
President.
Joel, thank you.
Senator
President.
Gilon also, and Senator Angara would like to be made
All right.
author.
Thank you.
Senator Angara used to be the prom king many times, so he knows
All
how
right,
to.
Senator we want to entertain a motion to close the period of
Yes,
amendments.
we move to close the period of amendments, Mr. President. So move.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of amendments closed.
President, with that, I move to approve on second
Maraming
reading
salamat.
Senate Bill number 1373. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill 1373 is approved on second reading.
Congratulations in order to the sponsor, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. With that, we move to suspend consideration of the same.
Consideration of the measure is suspended.
Therefore, Mr. President, I move that we, no other matters. Oh, one last matter, Mr. President. I forgot, it's housekeeping. I was told by the distinguished chairperson of the Committee on Education, Lower Education, Senator Gatchalian. This is with reference to House Bill number 4953 under Committee Report number 102 on the Balangay as the national boat of the Philippines. The chairperson of the committee, I could see the minority leaders smiling. The chairperson of the Committee on Basic Education, Arts and Culture, Senator Gatchalian, to which the bill was referred to, wrote this representation, and to quote from his letter, some very important new matters were, however, brought up after the report was filed, and I believe that the committee should consider these new matters, allowing a new resource persons and experts, including a marine archaeologist, whose relevant study on the balangays need to be presented and discussed in a public hearing. Upon his request, Mr. President, it was the request of the chairperson himself. I move that the committee report 102 be returned to the Committee on Basic Education, Arts, and Culture for purposes of conducting further public hearings to House Bill number 4953. So he wants it referred back to the committee, Mr. President, for more committee hearings, Mr. President. I so move.
Yes, but therefore, you are reverting it back, but for further public hearings. Ano?
Yes, Mr.
That
President.
means the public hearings that were conducted before stay. All right.
Yes, Mr. President.
And this is proposed by Senator Sherwin Gatchalian.
Gatchalian. Yes, sir. He was the one who proposed this to me when I saw him last week, and he wrote me officially, Mr. President. There's an official letter. So
But he was the sponsor.
he was the sponsor, Mr. President.
Right. Yeah.
I think he got rattled with the line of questioning of Senator Drilon.
Yeah, no,
President.
Senator Gatchalian is made of good stuff, huh? Because
Yes.
this is rare that the senator allows a committee report or something that is on the floor already to be brought back to the committee. That is a practice of humility, but it happened to me in 1993 when I was chairman of the Committee on Tourism. We declared a tourist zone in Palawan, but when it was on the floor and I were already sponsoring it, a group of indigenous people went to see Senator Edgardo Angara and told him that they were not invited during the hearings in the House and especially in the Senate. So he was asking me to bring it back myself instead of him making the motion. Senator Boy Herrera, just for the record, the trivia. Senator Boy Herrera told me, do not agree. He said, it never happens in the Senate. You should not bring it back. Sabi ko, why? Pride. No, I said, pride is the head of Satan. Humility is his headache. And so I brought it back to the committee, and I see Senator Gatchalian doing the same thing. Congratulations. So, any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. House Bill 4953 under Committee Report 102 is hereby returned to the committee for further public hearings.
President.
May we recognize Senator Angara, Mr. President?
Sani Angara. The younger
Mr.
Angara.
President, thank you, Mr. President. The majority leader mentioned that Senator Gatchalian proposed to him. Did he propose to anyone else, Mr. President? Never mind. Just kidding, Mr. President.
Irrelevant question, Mr. President. Anyway, thank you, Mr. President. At least he's not wearing pajamas, Mr. President, so it's all right. We can recognize him. You see.
Yes, he's a polo barong.
Yes, Mr. President.
Right.
Mr. President, with that, we have no other matters to tackle. I congratulate all of the sponsors today in their measures. Job well done. Mr. President, I move that we adjourn session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Tuesday, October 13, 2020. I so move.
Any objection? Hearing none. The session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Tuesday, October 13, 2020, taking into consideration the letter of the President calling for a special session up to October 16.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.